Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, and in this episode, I want to break down his Dark Materials Season 2, Episode 2, called The Cave. Now, just by that short, brief description, you can probably tell that it's going to be spoiler-filled. So, by that token, if you have not watched the HBO episode yet, please do so, then return. Now, I'm going to break it up kind of into two parts. One, the episode, and then two, the comparison to the book and similarities and differences. So that way, if you haven't read the book, you won't be like spoiler filled, you know? You'll just kind of get what you see in the actual show. So that's how I'm going to tackle this. And, I'm going to give my thoughts on it, the good, the bad, and, theories and so forth. And what I would like you to do is participate as well. This isn't just about me. One of the reasons I love TV and movies and art in general is because it's subjective and there's multiple perspectives but I'm just kind of introducing things, and I would love if you commented or hit me up on social media at Phil Svitek so we can discuss further. One of the reasons I'm choosing to talk about this show is because I love it and I want to create that sense of community. Right. So let's get into it without further ado, shall we? So overall, I thought a good follow-up episode to the season premiere. For me, I think the strength of the series is Lyra and now Will, right? So and them in particular together. So the stuff with the Magisterium, I thought kind of detracted a little bit. I know it was necessary. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit greater length. But, anytime to me, it is always Lyra's story and the story of Will as her companion. And so for me, I really, I don't know. Just for me, I would love to have complete focus on that. I know that's not fully possible, but nonetheless, that's kind of my assessment of things. But overall, it was great. So let's start with kind of, I guess, the Magisterium. So a couple things going on here, right? I did think this was, done in a good way as far as getting the witches to act. Serafina, there's obviously opposition over within their own clans of how to handle this situation. And in essence, by what happens in this episode, I think an act like this, the bombing, will unify them. It'll be the catalyst going forward. And, it's a tragedy. It's like all things we unify towards a common enemy, and now they pretty much have a common enemy, that is the Magisterium, and so forth. So in that regard, I thought it worked. And certainly I think it gives a good motivation for the witches. I don't think it's any secret that the witches have a huge role to play. Certainly, just through storytelling devices, the fact that the season 2 premiere opened up with the witch's voiceover and about the prophecy and so forth, and they know about the prophecy and they hid. Last episode, the reveal of what Lyra's true name is, that's definitely going to play majorly. So obviously they're setting it up in that sense. So I don't think it's any thing to speculate. Will the witches have a big hand to play? Of course the witches will have a big hand to play, and so this was a big catalyst to get them to act. In what way they're going to act, obviously that will remain to be seen. The other kind of aspect, obviously we're getting kind of the inner workings of the Magisterium, and I think because in some sense they represent the villainous side to this, even though there's multiple worlds within this, certainly, everything's kind of the jumping off point, the inciting incident is Lord Asriel and the Magisterium. By kind of showing more of the inner workings of the Magisterium, I think, they're trying to build up the villain. But I think what I do appreciate in this sense is it also serves twofold. Because this episode, in a lot of ways, is also about Mrs. Coulter. You know, I think the way Phillip Pullman kind of writes, his Dark Materials, and the reason why it's kind of called that is, it goes against kind of the idea of religion and things like that. But ultimately, to me, when you really kind of break it down, and even just from what we've seen, it's less about like religion as this bad thing, more about just restrictions and, certainly in this episode, like, you can see like sexism at play, and certainly that is not in keeping with, just the idea of like, do as you're told type of thing, when in fact, like, I think when you really break it down, Phillip Pullman's belief and themes really are evident of, that as human beings, we shine our brightest when we're being fully alive and happy and joyous and, angry, sad, and all those things. And, the Magisterium represents the suppression of those things. And in terms of Mrs. Coulter particularly, that moment when they're watching Father Graves interrogate the witch's kind of whatever we'll call it, a spokesperson. I love the effect that it has on Mrs. Coulter hearing this of, as the man talks about, women have this beauty, and they are able to figure out a way to separate their demon from themselves without destroying the soul. And obviously, in this world, that is considered blasphemous. And so, in that regard, you could see the inner workings of Mrs. Coulter and kind of really trying to process this. What I love about Ruth's portrayal is there's a very specific nuance, and even in the books, and I'm not spoiling anything ahead. I'm just kind of basing off of up until this point, both in the terms of the books, but also, what's evident is the idea that Mrs. Coulter, there is a love for Lyra. I mean, that's why she goes to see Thorold, and she sits down with him, and she wants to know what is happening with her daughter. Even with Charles, she said, like, my daughter is no concern to you. So there's always this weird, quiet, subdued, protective nature to Mrs. Coulter, in spite of her otherwise heinous nature, let's say. As far as the other mechanics, the voting and things like that, again, I think I appreciate the dramatization of it, and I think it sets things up very well. And if we had to cram it into this episode to kind of make that happen, then great. But if truth be told, as I opened up the episode, I would love to kind of stay away from them for the time being. I mean, it's like, let them sort of do what they got to do and let them be this almost ominous presence. No different than kind of they're treating Lord Asriel. We haven't seen, in season 1, we didn't see Lord Asriel that much. And certainly we haven't seen him now. And so it's a mystery as to when we'll see him. But I think he's always been that almost larger than life figure. And, the Magisterium, I think, they've done a good enough job where they've shown us the hypocrisy, the sinister nature of the Magisterium, but I don't think it's not like a Thanos situation in the Avengers. To me, Thanos is very interesting and things like that, and you can you almost side with him, right? Like I think when you introduced a villain in that sense, there's. You can have a very compelling type of villain, and it's like, who do I side with? And I think Mrs. Coulter represents that in terms of, the story, because it's like, she's trying to do the right thing, but she's not always going about it the right way. But you can kind of justify her actions. Whereas with the Magisterium, certainly, they're kind of trying to do what the right thing is, but obviously, it's especially in today's day and age. it's a very, I feel like, old school mentality and very hard to justify, at least, from my perspective. And so that's why, for me, I don't think we have to explore that as much. The villain is what the villain is, and there's the inner workings of it. I don't know. I think we can get enough of them, just glimpses of, okay, they destroyed the witches' kind of homes and things like that. And it's like, okay, that gives me everything that I need. But it sets up surely a really important villain, through this voting. Now, tied into the Magisterium is Charles. Charles, who is the man that Miss Coulter is certainly friendly with, and he's traveling back and forth between the worlds, and he sees Lyra within the museum, and it's interesting how he's playing both sides. He's, at the end of the day, he's a man out for himself, and because he could have very easily told Mrs. Coulter about Lyra and things like that, but he's playing with her. He's trying to see what she knows and what she doesn't know, and how she can be an advantage to him, how Lyra can be an advantage to him, how he can pit them against each other. These are the kind of like politicking within this show that I love, and to me, Charles is the far more interesting villain versus, let's say, this nebulous abstraction that is the Magisterium, if I'm being honest. So, I appreciated his role in this episode, and certainly have in this series thus far. So, that was kind of interesting to watch, and to that effect, I guess tangentially now I'll connect to Lyra, right, and her going about in this Oxford. One of the things that I just appreciate, right? I love these little touches. Lyra, when she thinks she's like within the halls of Jordan, or soon to be therein, she's running, and we get that great kind of camera shot reminiscent of episode 1 of the series. And I thought that was just such a brilliant touch, to then juxtapose it of like, oh, there is no Jordan College in this Oxford, and it's not the Oxford that she actually knows. So I thought that was just the kind of nice touch in that way, and how they played with it. I really thought that was beautiful. And what I think overall, in terms of the tone, I could be, this is my perception of it. You might perceive it differently, and if you do, just let me know. But the books are a little bit play a little bit more innocent, whereas this, at least kind of just by seeing it and observing it more in real time, feels like a more mature PG-13 type of content. At times, not always, but at times. And maybe that's just my naivete as I read the books, but that was always kind of my perception of it, at least. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. And so I do appreciate, and maybe it's Daphne Keane. She has that ability to play more mature than is her age, and certainly that's what her and Will, as they go about in this Oxford, are trying to portray. So they can get the answers that they're looking for and so forth. And I thought, the progression of Lyra in this episode was really well done. There's an excitement there. There's nuanced aspect of, obviously this is new and she's trying to figure it out. She rushes and she almost gets, she does get kind of hit by the car. Luckily not too much, but yeah, I thought that played really well. And her, what, just kind of a quick tangent now that I thought of it. I thought a brilliant touch was the use of the cell phone, where she asked, well, like, why are you always consulting that thing? He's like, because I need information. He's like, oh, I have kind of one of those. So I thought that was really good. And it was a good use to then utilize that, something that is true to the characters, to then put them up against each other of like, well, you're a murderer. And, of course she doesn't mean it in a pejorative, but for him, any sort of mention of that is a scary thing. And so he gets upset with her. So I thought that was a rather nice touch. One of the best aspects to me of this episode was how they handled Mary Malone. She's a character that, as is implied in this, like she's going to have a role to play, and so there's a tenderness to there, like much in the same way that like there's a tenderness to Will and Lyra, but now there's that tenderness with Mary, and much like they progressed that kinship in the season premiere with Will and Lyra, they do a wonderful job of progressing it with here, and I thought Lyra handles that moment well. Daphne as Lyra, of initially kind of just laying everything out on the table of like knowing that she has to tell the truth, and it's like, oh wait, if I, it's not a matter of her trying to lie. It's like, how the hell do you even like begin to explain this? But they do, and they find that commonality. And I thought a nice touch as part of this kind of moment was when Mary is recounting, they tried objects within, quote unquote, the cave, which I love the fact that it's a quantum computer. The cell phone aspect and the quantum computer, not things that are in the book, simply because this isn't a spoiler, simply because the book was written pre, smartphones and quantum computers. And so I love the updated version of the book in that regard. So really nice touch. And specifically when they're testing out the cave, the first object they test is the apple, right? And certainly, when you talk about original sin, apple is very representative of original sin, right? And it's in that sense, it's kind of surprising, like that dust didn't go, didn't respond to the apple, but as Mary talks about, anything man-made, it reacts to, right? So I think that's very telling and something to keep in mind moving forward, both from the standpoint of, just on a number of things, like if the apple is the original sin, does the dust not touch the apple because it is sin, and then other things, then once man becomes sinful, why making new stuff? Why is that like dust settling on that? I think that'll play a key part. And certainly the way, like, it's one of the things. This isn't a spoiler, but one of the things. It's a whole separate thing of reading the description of Lyra within the novel, of her, testing the machine and seeing the images on the machine. It's a whole nother thing to see it executed. And I thought they did a brilliant job with this, of the visuals in terms of the computer and so forth. That was just really, really well done. And then as far as Will goes, you could see kind of his concern for Lyra, and I appreciated that moment, that they build towards in the garden, where they finally have a moment of truth, and she shares with him the alethiometer, and he, it's like, okay, I'm not. She doesn't pose a threat. She needs him as much as he needs her, and that's going to become evident. And the fact that like now he knows that his father is alive, and that he needs her, I think puts him a lot at ease. And because think about it, like at the end of the day, Lyra is very adventurous, but Will hasn't really been, right? This is all really sort of new to him, and certainly cares about his mother very dearly. And so to get that news that she's safe, in spite of everything that he's doing, like he's doing the best that he can, but he knows every action he's taken thus far puts him and his mother in danger, and to know that she is in fact safe is a good thing. And I thought the way they played that of him having to make the decision of like, this is the same decision that my father had to make of leaving my mother. You could see the weight that it holds for Will, and so I did. I thought that was really well done, and it's tragic. I think this episode, if nothing else, reaffirms that Will doesn't have a lot of people to trust. Even he took a long shot in terms of leaving his mother where he left her, simply because it's like, that was a long shot. In this episode, he learns about his grandmother and grandfather, and he can't even trust them. So to be able to trust this girl from quote unquote another world, I think is a breath of fresh air for him, and so I thought that was really well done. Also, the other thing I forgot to mention, I guess, when I was talking about Mrs. Coulter, but we end the episode on her, and she makes the decision. She's done her work at the Magisterium now. She's going to go off, and you can kind of tell like her concern is Lyra and where Lyra's at, because as she learns, Lyra essentially followed Lord Asriel, and she learns what Lord Asriel was doing, and it's like, oh, so now my daughter is in this other war. Like, she followed Lord Asriel, so where is she now? So that's going to be interesting. All right, so that's the overall thoughts of the episode, and I didn't get into all the details simply because I want to even get further with things as I talk about the book to movie, or not movie, but TV series comparison. So I kind of held off on some things. Now this is where I lay out all the cards on the table. So if you haven't read the books, I would encourage you not to continue. Thank you for watching this far. But now I'm going to get into full book spoiler territory. Okay, so you've been warned. The Magisterium in the books, not this involved, right? And so in that sense, it shows a clear deviation from the books. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. Just not necessarily my favorite thing. I think this, if this was like the episode where we got a lot of it, great. Now we can start to pull back. But if they kind of continue this moving forward in every episode, I'm not going to love it as much. I did think it was a good touch to add in Will's grandparents to show that he had, this is a new thing. Where this goes and what this means, we'll see. Because I think so far they have been handling, in terms of the book, it was always kind of very interesting to me because I don't know, there's just kind of a separation of reality in some sense of a boy just leaves his mother, and it's like that's kind of, from my perspective, all that's kind of really done as far as the book. But the fact that he checks in on her now, and so forth, I think this plays more to what I would deem as reality. And so I do appreciate that aspect of this telling in terms of Will. Now, seeing his grandparents and what they'll mean, I don't know. Now that they've been introduced, it's like they have to have a role to play. And I'm curious, I think it's going to be a fine line to toe because in a lot of ways, there's a lot of characters here already. And I think sometimes that can ruin a movie or a TV show or even a book, right? Because, sometimes why just create more characters when you already can accomplish that same thing with a character you already have and so forth. And so, what do the grandparents bring? I'm not sure. I think they might have, to some degree, at least in this episode, been added to give Will more to do because, really in the book, as I recall, them going to Oxford really was more about Lyra's adventure versus Will's. So I think they were trying to balance it a little bit more. Not sure if that was fully necessary. Time will tell based on, because I have no idea where this is going. The grandparents to me aren't part of that. The other thing, I could be wrong on this, and forgive me, we'll just call it 2020 brain. And, even though I reread the books last year, I'm pretty sure Jordan College was in Will's Oxford as much as it was in Lyra's. Maybe minor differences, but I think it's interesting that it's not in the telling of this. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please don't crucify me. Pun intended, since it's so heavily religious. Other than that, yeah, I think that was kind of the major comparisons. Certainly when Lyra is interacting with Mary Malone, how that's handled, I thought was really well done. In the book, it introduces the idea of the financial stakes for Mary a little bit sooner, just because you can, and the way that it's told. And I think, the book plays it a little bit differently, but I think the spirit of both are equal, even though the execution is slightly different. I think in the book, Mary goes more along with it because she's like resigned to the idea of like, oh, whatever, like, F it, I might as well entertain this because, they're going to shut this down anyway, and we don't have any funding, so what's the use of anything? Might as well just go with this BS. This obviously doesn't play like that. I think it plays a little bit differently, and, but the spirit, as I said, is, or at least to me, remains the same. But in this, the idea that that funding is an issue gets brought up through Oliver later when we're cheersing with beers, and she tells him about Lyra and things like that. And, we'll see kind of how that goes and whatnot. And the other aspect that's also different in the books, as I recall, okay, I could be wrong on to the full extent. The witches just kind of, went after Lyra. And I do appreciate the kind of deviation from the book in that sense, because I think now there's a little bit more motivation for them to help Lyra versus just out of the goodness of their heart or this prophecy, blah, 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 right? So I do appreciate that. One other quick thing, I think it is very interesting, a differentiation from the book is that, we note the character of Charles a lot more in the TV series, and so there's like dramatic irony in the series versus in the book. Lyra doesn't quite know who this Charles guy is that she meets at the museum. So I thought that was nice, a little bit of touch, obviously because they committed to that in season 1, so they have to kind of carry it through, and so it makes sense, right? And I do appreciate it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm sure you have your own, so to that effect, please, as I said, share them, comment down below, or hit me up on social media at Svitek, and let's converse. I would love to, and hope to see you for the next one. Bye.